All right. Well, it looks like it was going without me. I don't know exactly what I did. I don't know if I even had this on right. So Laurel hasn't helped me at all. Technically, I wasn't supposed to start for 5 more minutes, but I was trying to figure some things out, and in typical Kamon Reynolds fashion, botched it. Can somebody give me a thumbs up that you all can hear me, or something like that? Not a thumbs up, just a yeah. All right, good deal. Good deal. All right. Well, we're live 4 minutes early. This was just kind of impromptu. It's the way I do a lot of things, just as time allows and that kind of thing. It's been really busy. Wanted to give some updates on the experimental yard, but also wanted to take a lot of questions and answers tonight. The experimental yard is just been delayed just slightly. The fellow that's bringing the nukes just needed a little bit more time. This year has been a little bit cooler. The last couple of years have been kind of cooler, so it's to be expected. It's not a big deal to me. And also, his sister was having a baby right on the day that we were planning on getting the bees and installing them. So, I was like, no big deal. 1 week is not going to kill us. And I'm sure we'll be starting with that very shortly. There's been a lot of work, not just me and Laurel, or Laurel and I, sorry, mother. But there has been a lot of people behind the scenes working towards this, and it's going to be really nice once we get it going. So Paul Murray asked, where did I get the hat? This was and is a hat that you can get from Randy McCaffrey, the Dirt Rooster, 628 Dirt Rooster channel. Randy does a ton of cutouts and all kinds of other bee shenanigans. And he came to my conference and he gave me this hat. And it's I'm wearing it because my hair is so bad. Been got bevel hair. All right. Oh, got Greg Burns with the Contrary Beekeepers podcast and his son Jake. They came out here and spent the day with me and did an interview on their podcast. That'll be up at some point down the road. But I also have a lot of feeder buckets from Greg, and I really enjoyed meeting both Greg and Jake. Really nice people. A cup of Joe on me. Hey, Thomas, I really appreciate that, and I will use that towards some coffee. Any excuse for a good cup of dark, dark coffee. I like it black. Can you go over how to set up the queen making box frames? All right. I'm actually raising queens right now. And so this is a wonderful time in northern Tennessee to be raising queens. It's easy to raise queens right now. And I don't know where you're at, but it's going to be that time soon if it isn't already. So it really depends on what you're going after, the setup that you may want to do. If you're doing a 5 frame system, you're not going to be able to produce quite as many queens as if you're doing a different system. The one I'm using right now is 10 frames as a starter, and then I have packed doubles as finishers. You can get hundreds of cells pretty easily with that. However, I imagine that probably you're wanting to just raise some for yourself, and you can do quite a bit with the 5 frame nuke, but it just depends on how you run it. So, this is a question that I got recently on how many can you make with that 5 frame nuke setup? And the answer is if you do it just as a standalone 5 frame nuke and it's really full of young bees, plenty of nutrition, you can graft 30 cells in there, and you can probably get, if you're good, 27, 29, maybe even 30 on a rare 100% take. But then, even as they cap those, over time, after they cap them on day 6, they'll start taking some of those out. And I've talked to several beekeepers about this, and no one seems to know 100% of the reason why they do this, but they do. And that's one of the reasons why I use an incubator. Is on day 7, I go in and we pull these capped cells and put them in the incubator, brush them gently, and we can get a whole lot of queens that way. The only thing I can figure is that, five frame nukes, like, why in the world do we need 27 queen cells or a five frame nuke? I don't know if they're measuring bee population, because some of the cells that they knock down are beautiful, gorgeous cells. But when you think of like these, like right now with the swarm season, the ones that are swarming that have like 20, 30 cells in them, and some of them do that I've seen, they are packed doubles or stronger. And so I think it has something to do with the population. So to answer your question, sorry, I'm skirting around it. I want to take, if possible, two nice frames of capped brood. You don't have to have any brood in it, but I'm thinking long term, I'd like to sustain this for more than just a round or two of grafts. So I would like to at least one good frame of capped brood in there, if possible. And if you have multiple colonies in early spring where the hardwoods are producing all this pollen, you should be able to pull at least one or two frames from colonies that are mostly bee bred. I want two of those in there. Then you're going to have a blank frame, and that is going to be a foundation frame that you will remove once you put your grafts in, your graft frame in. And then you can have a food frame that has honey on it. But what I'm starting to do is just put another foundation frame in. And this is because I'm feeding them constantly, anyways. So they're going to have plenty of nutrition. And I don't want them drawing combs around those cells. And they will, if they run out of space to put new wax in there, they feel like they can. They will just tie up and web all those cells up. And it's a frustrating nightmare. Try to fool with those. So having those foundation frames really help. But once the bees get older, they won't perform as good. So about every 2 weeks, I move the location of the five frame nuke. And I usually replace that location with a small colony that could use a good population boost foraging wise. And I do that so when I move it the next day, I can see how many nurse bees I have. And if I want to continue, I can do that. If you're using it as a starter and a finisher, no incubator, we're probably talking best case scenario. You're going to get 16, 20 cells out of it to full 10-day term. If you're using an incubator or just grafting into it and then using a double as a finisher, the sky is almost the limit, especially if you're grafting it at one day, coming back 24 hours later, pulling that out, grafting again into it, and taking the first grafts and sticking them in a strong double deep finisher. And I mean, you can just go to town. Let's see. Do you do hobby or commercial? Well, I toy around with hobby stuff as well. And I wouldn't say I'm commercial either. Commercial, in my opinion, is more along the lines of trucking bees around the country. I would think I would fall into professional. Um, definitely not large scale professional, but low scale. Let's see. Oh yeah, the swarm videos. So I haven't lost. The only swarms that I know that I have shot off, I've caught, which has been very fortunate for me, but I'm able to stay on top of it a little bit better this year, which is nice. But I was still not planning on sending any of those off. So I have 3 swarms here at the house, and they're all doing really good and drawing foundations like crazy. I missed a question up here. I know I did. Well, I missed a lot of questions, but it was a pretty good one. How do I manage ticks as a beekeeper? Keep it trim around the beehives as much as possible, and there are some essential oils you can spray around your legs, but keep in mind some things can annoy bees. Tennessee Ronan, got my first hive installed. Looks like it's doing pretty good. I'll check it for the first time next week. Well, sounds good. It's that time of the year. Why is my queen laying 4 more eggs in one cell? Well, if you actually have a queen, and it sounds like you probably do, I imagine that you've probably looked into that. It can happen whenever there's just not enough places for her to go. A queen this time of the year is getting fed a lot of nutrition, so she just lays, lays, lays. And if they don't have enough clean cells or enough places for her to go with it, she's just desperate to get those eggs out, and she can really lay up. New queens are really bad about this. Young queens can come back, and even with a strong population covering 20 frames, can still lay 2 or 3 eggs in a cell. Of course, laying workers is a different situation and can be a big problem. But you probably just have a queen that's a little overzealous for what the bees can keep up with. All right, getting down to the bottom. Current pest control. Hey, man, thanks so much for coming on here and supporting our channel. If you have a question, current pest control, let me have it. Do you use any brood boosters in your feed? I don't use anything in my sugar syrup. We were feeding quite a bit of nukes and young colonies today. That's actually what I did this afternoon. And, I just, sugar syrup works wonderful. It does a great job. And I don't, the only reason I would use it is if I had a bunch, I was trying to keep it from fermenting afterwards. But I don't want, there still can be robbing this time of the year in certain locations. So I want it to smell as little as possible. Do you feel the Apomae boxes are a better choice for beekeeping in an extreme cold environment? I'm relocating to Alaska and looking for options for my beekeeping. Wow. Okay, I was fixing to say, I like a lot of the things about the Apomae, but the prices have gone up quite a bit, and I've been told they're going to go down eventually once the market corrects itself. But they are pretty expensive. But if I was in Alaska, I'm looking into something insulated, whether it's an Apomae, whether it's a polystyrene hive, whatever it is. I have a couple bee buddies that live in Alaska, and it's quite a challenge to overwinter bees up there. It's just brutally cold. And some of them stick them in a cellar that's underneath their house. It's a little bit warmer. Obviously, you don't want to get it too warm, but instead of it being -30, maybe just 20 degrees or 10 degrees or something like that because of the heat from the house or something. I don't know. But honestly, I don't know. I don't know anything about the Apomae other than what I've used here in Tennessee. It stands to reason. I would think that insulated hives would work better than wooden hives there, but I'm really not an expert when it comes to northern beekeeping at all, and I'm very hesitant to say yes, you should. I would definitely look into Ian and several of those guys up there. Also, see if you can get a hold of some extreme guys up in Alaska, and maybe they could help you out. Sorry, I can't be of more help, but I don't know. Have a package needing another brood box, but weather is going to be dropping in the 30s at night. Should I wait until it warms up? Well, if it's getting really warm in the day, Nicole, and they really do need it, then I would. But if it's looking like you're just going to have a couple days, 2 or 3 days, and it's not going to be an issue until for swarming until after that, then I would wait. And I've done some videos. There was the hive that I did a video on where I added that second deep box after I did the reversal on the colony before, and I had several people saying that it already should have had one. You definitely don't want to let them get too far, but it depends. If when you have combs, bees immediately take to combs. If you're adding foundation, you need to get it on fairly soon because you definitely don't want them to plug out that bottom box. What I look for is I'd like to see 8 frames of coverage. And if they're starting to finish that 8th frame with drawing that comb out, then I got to throw that other box on there. And I've got to pull one of those up, and then I'll put it in the center. You know your weather better than I do, but if they're getting close to plugging out to that 10 frame box, then they should be able to warm that upper box, even in that temperature. All right, Pleasant View, Tennessee, caught a swarm. It's that time of the year. I haven't got my swarm traps out yet. I'm really frustrated, but it just higher priorities have kind of gotten in the way. It's fine. I really don't have time for it, but I really do enjoy swarm trapping. Let's see. Info on treatments, which ones are better, and time. Well, that's the whole reason we're doing the test yard, because there's a whole lot more questions than there are answers to that topic. Apivar, if it works correctly for you, is one of the is maybe more one of the more consistent products. And the reason people liked it, it was a little pricey, but if it gave you 90% or more reduction, it was worth it because it's so gentle on the bees. You know, formic and thymol and a lot of these other products that are more natural can really set the hive back and the queens back. That doesn't mean that you can't use them safely, but they are a lot of times rougher, on the bees than sometimes the synthetics are. Of course, the synthetics, we have to think about the impacts of chemical residues in our combs. And Apivar was pretty good about that because it oxidized very quickly. But, Bob, Benny, myself, we're not using Apivar this year because it's just hasn't been doing good for us the last couple of years. And I have a lot of people saying, well, mites are developing resistance to it. I don't see how they could. I've only used it a few years. And then on top of that, I always rotated Apivar, thymol, oxalic acid in one season. I usually have about 3 different treatments, but I really like the combination of multiple things. But this year, I'm going to be using more Apigard thymol than I have in the past, and oxalic acid, and leaving the Apivar alone. And I've wanted to get off of the Apivar for a while just because I don't like the idea of having a synthetic in the hive. So that's what the test yard is, for multiple reasons, but it's also for me. I want to see what is happening using these products. I really think the best treatment options out there are creating small brood breaks and hitting them with oxalic acid or a gentle treatment that is going to give you a high rate of kill and be gentle on the bees. But right now, I would say the best thing you can do is create that brood break and then throw in some oxalic acid vapor or dribble during that period. That's definitely the best method, just more labor intensive. Can you talk about storing drawn comb in the freezer and how long is it viable? Well, it's viable pretty much as long as you store it, as far as I'm concerned. I've had combs in the freezer for a couple of years. Ask my wife. I've been doing better about that lately. But yeah, they'll be fine. Now, as far as the bee bread, it'll degrade over time. So that's just the way that it works. I don't know if it gets freezer burnt. It just doesn't store quite as good. All right, trying to get back down to the bottom. I'm still quite a ways up. Nosema treatment with fumagil in spring and fall. Is there anything better out there in poopy equipment? Toss out, clean, and if, how to clean? I don't know. I have never done anything specifically for nosema. Of course, I'm in Tennessee, very mild winters here. And I've actually thought about looking into checking nosema levels more. I'm seeing if they are chipping away at the percentages of my bees, but we don't have a rough winter here. I've never used fumagillin either. I've never used terramycin. So I don't know a whole lot about those products. I really just try to breed good bees. And I also have purchased several queens from Michael Palmer, who's up in Vermont. And I know that he really specifically breeds for bees that are resistant to those type of things, because it's a big issue up there in Vermont. Where did you get an incubator? So you can get an incubator a lot of different places. You can make your own as well. I actually just purchased a second one because we're just going to be raising more queens this year, and are. And this one comes from, well, it's the one that Bob Benny uses, and I thought, well, goodness, if it works for Bob, I'm going to try it out. Bob's a really nice guy, and I consider him a really great beekeeper as well. And he said this, I think it's GQF, yeah, GQF incubator. The model number is 236403. Let me double check that, but I haven't used it yet. But Bob really likes it. And, you know, he raises hundreds of cells. You can go to Bob Benny's video on queen rearing, and he has in the link below where you can find those. And so that's what I'm going to be using. I also have my wooden one. Now, I think that thing set me back about $170, $180, maybe it was 160. I can't remember, something like that. However, when it comes, you know, we can stick, you know, hundreds of queens through that in a year. So drop in the bucket. If it does its job, I'll be tickled pink. Let's see. Dr. Pepper, Prepper Survival. Well, you're not late. I just didn't tell anybody that I was doing one. I just a kind of last minute thing. Well, Nicole, it is an egg incubator. Let me just go ahead and pull it out and see what the model number is, if I can find it. But the nice thing about this one, and it's so important, it's got a fan in it. If you don't have a fan in your incubator, you're getting uneven temps. So having that fan is really important. It's got a digital readout on the front. So you can set it. I'm going to have mine at 93 degrees. Then have a sponge in there, just like I do in my other one. And just keep that humidity up. Nothing too fancy about it. I'll do a video on it. Bob's got his, and I'll do a version of mine and let you all know how I like it. I've got my other one going right now, but it's always good to have a backup. My fear is the other one might go out on me. I got it used, and then what am I going to do, right? So this is a model 1588 Hova Baiter. So there you have it right there. We'll see how well it works. Let's see. Do you ever have any queens for sale? I do from time to time. Right now, all my queens are going for the nukes. And I actually do have a few extra nukes available. I think we'll probably have another 35 to 40. So that is available. You can email me at tennesseesbees.com. Nope, not tennesseesbees.com. Sorry. That's what I get for halfway thinking. I'm going to type it below. It's tennesseesbees@gmail.com. All right. So in the comments, I just left that email, and it would be first come, first serve. Are you going to join the Bearded Bee Club? No, this is how busy I've been lately. I really I can't grow a super thick beard, and Laurel doesn't want me to have one, so I usually don't. I have a queenless hive that is slowly dwindling, lane worker, but it's on its way out. But my big hive could be split. How can I evict the bees from the dwindling hive so I can use the hive? Honestly, what I do in those situations is I shake the bees out, and they'll have to merge with other colonies. And that's typically what I see is, you know, let's say I have a yard of 30 colonies or whatever the number is, and there's one like that. I'll just literally take them and shake them out. And over time, they'll work their way back into colonies. And during a nice flow, like we have right now here in Tennessee, they'll just merge in and help the other colonies. And since the other colonies are queen right, it will, you know, that they'll just go back to doing what they should be doing. And then you can use that equipment however you need to. Now, in a dearth period, they're actually, as the bees try to get into other colonies, they actually might just be kicked out. Or even cause a slight bit of fighting, but they won't be able to do much. Yeah, I did. All right. Hello, America. Hey, Bee Lord. How's it going there in Poland? Hope it's going good. Hope your bees and all that stuff's going well for you. All right. Hey, Kamon, how many times have you seen one hive swarm? The reason I ask is mine swarmed 3 times, and I've never heard of that. Yes, they will. 3 is quite a bit, but it is possible. Secondary swarms are pretty common, and I really hate secondary swarms. And some people don't like this method, and that's fine. You don't have to do it this way. But if I see a nice honey production colony like the ones in the video that I just had out, I go in there. Oh, there's no queen. They swarm. There's all these swarm cells. Keep in mind, I have queens. So it doesn't really affect me if I crush all these cells. And that's exactly what I do. Because if I let those cells go on, there's a 50-50 chance that they're going to perform a secondary swarm. The first swarm in a big colony, it's a bummer, but I've had you can keep them from swarming at this point, you can still get a small honey crop or keep your bees, and they're still a nice hive. The problem is that they send a secondary swarm. They haven't had a queen laying in a while, and they really just take a ton of bees, and you have very little left. They swarm 3 times on you guys, nothing. A lot of times there's not even enough bees to guard the combs, and you can get small hive beetle problems this way. So I smash all the cells, and that makes them queenless, but I'm able to put a queen in there or come back 4 or 5 days later and drop one of my queen cells. And by then, let me tell you, the whole stimuli of swarming is long gone. They're freaking out like, oh my goodness, we have no way of raising a queen. But that completely eliminates that secondary swarm every time. And I as a business, the secondary swarms are just killer. I can't have it. So that's what I do. Hey, Palmer Brothers Bee Farm, thank you so much, man. Or I assume you're a man. If it's a lady, I apologize. But yeah, I appreciate it, Palmer Brothers. Is there a place of to send entombed pollen to find out what toxin is in it? I don't know, Thomas Stone, but I do know that I have seen a lot of entombed pollen that just came from pollens that fermented really bad. Like I've left some out one time, some frames of bee bread, water got on it, it molded, and the bees just entombed it as opposed to pulling it out. Sometimes they yank it out, and sometimes it gets really hard in there after it dries. And I think they just have too hard of a time, or it's too nasty or whatever, and they'll cover it up. I don't think it's always pesticides or fungicides. Sometimes I think it's just nasty or it's too much work, and they just cap it over. That's just my personal opinion, but I think that happens. I really do, but I have no idea where you can send that. If somebody finds out or knows, let me know. So, John Hale, please expand on how you're specifically implementing brood breaks for my control. Okay. So, for me, if we did that on 300 hives, it is possible, but quite a big pain to go in and physically catch 300 queens and to also cage them and then have to come back and do all that. So, we definitely don't. How we're doing it is we're creating a split out of each one of our colonies. And this is smart. We're getting everything that we need. Bees need to split. That's why they want to swarm. But we, as beekeepers, I feel like, we just do it in a more high success way where we give them a proper cavity. We give them feed if they have to have it. We split them in an even way so the parent colony doesn't take too big of a hit, but the daughter colony is not too small of a swarm, all that kind of stuff. But when we do that, if we take the capped brood and just leave larvae in the original, and kind of make them a little bit, it's a little bit of a out of balance situation, but it works fine. I've never seen any issues with the queens. And drop queen cells in there, then that creates an opening. There's a couple different ways you can make these splits. And even if you don't create a 100% brood break, you can typically get at least a 80 to 90% brood break, do your treatment, and still get a nice kill. But if you get really specific about it, especially if you're dropping queen cells in there, you get a full brood break for a few days, like 5, and then you just hammer them with any treatment. Works effective pretty much when there's a solid brood break. So that works really good. And so I'm getting the split, I'm getting new queens, I'm getting mite control, everything that we need besides the nutrition element. And it works really good for me. And the bees are just looking great here. How many hives do I need to go full time? It really depends on how you do things. If you're a commercial beekeeper selling honey for under $2 a pound, then you're going to need a lot of hives if honey production is your thing. But, if you're able to market a lot of honey and do a lot of online sales and you're averaging $8, $9, $10 a pound, then you could have a lot less hives. I would say 200 hives would probably be where I would say that be the starting point. Some people that are a little bit more creative could do full time, maybe under that, but you're gonna have to do something. You have to be really good at marketing I'd say 200 would be the starting point. One of our speakers at our conference in January is Greg Rogers. He runs 400 colonies all by himself. I am anxious to talk to this man. And, he's like, I think 60 something, runs 400 colonies. Guy's got to know a couple cool tips and tricks. So, and he seems like a really nice guy over the phone. I'm excited to meet Greg in person. But yeah, I would say 200. I run 300, and 300 does it very well for me, Matt and Sarah, for sure. All right. Do you expect the Asian spotted lanternfly to come to your area? It probably will. Everything else eventually comes here. Tennessee is a wonderful area for all bugs. It seems like by and large, they love it. But yeah, I'm just kind of waiting to see. Well, one of the things that you can, again, if you have drawn comb swarming, it's a lot easier. It's not a surefire way of preventing swarming, but it really helps. You can checkerboard, what they call checkerboarding, some frames in there and help give that queen laying room. You have places for them to move honey up above. That's typically when it happens for me. Like when these swarms took off, it's because the nectar flow started here. And when I was going in there looking through those colonies, if I just shook the bees a little bit, out came nectar with it. And I hadn't been feeding in that yard for over a month. So I know that it was nectar. And there's stuff blooming around here. The fringed Phacelia snow flowers are blooming. Wild mustard's blooming. Wild cherry, red buds, several things are blooming here. So it's that time of the year. And a couple of these colonies I just hadn't gotten back to, and they got a little plugged. And the queens were laying sheets of brood and they had nowhere to go. And it's time to hit the trees. The stimuli was to, okay, we're in great shape, good nutrition. Adios, beekeeper. How many hives did you start with? I started with 5. I came out of winter with 1 because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. Started when I was 14. Sent a swarm off the first April with that one hive that I had alive, and I thankfully caught them and put them into a hive, and I had 2. And for many years, I started purchasing some packages to try to build, and as many as I would buy, I would almost lose. And it was just kind of a continual thing until I started really focusing on what is actually going on in the hive. And there's a lot going on. That's one of the reasons why we have these YouTube videos and this live chat. But I started out with 5, and I think 3 is a good number. I really like having 3, and then making a couple splits off of that. So people are like, oh man, that's 5 or 6. But bees are dynamic. Right now, it is so easy. If I wanted to, I could take my operation 600, 700, 800 colonies. They wouldn't all be massive, but I could do it. It's easy to grow bees right now. It's easy to make queens right now. It's easy to draw combs. We're drawing combs, foundations here. This is the easy time of the year. It's not going to be easy here in August or September. And so I'm gonna lose some bees. It's gonna happen. And knowing that that's gonna happen, if I want to have 100 colonies, then I want to go into winter with probably 120. If I want 100 production colonies, doesn't mean that I'll lose all 20 of those, but there's going to be some colonies that are lackluster. Maybe the queen didn't make good. Maybe she's old, especially if you're not proactive about young queens. Then you definitely could have some old queens that just decide to expire in March. I've seen it. I saw it this year. I see it every year. And those old queens just run out of gas and they're laying some worker brood. And about every 40 or 50 worker eggs are starting to lay drones. And, those things happen. So beekeeping's all about building when it's easy to build and trying to maintain through the summer. At least here, for some of you, summer's the go time. But for here, it's you have your winter break, you have your spring building and growing, you have your summer maintaining, and then in the fall, hopefully producing those winter bees to repeat the cycle. Where's the best place you buy equipment? I buy a lot of equipment and from different people. And, it really just depends. I buy some stuff from Man Lake. If I get the best prices there, Ultra B is a good product. I bought 2,000 something pounds of pollen sub this year. I bought a bunch of queen rearing cups. There's 1,000 of them and cages and all kinds of stuff. But then, there's some local guys that I buy from. And, I'm talking to John Hill and looking at seeing if I can get some stuff from John. I've been really pleased with the stuff that he brought down, and I like to get more of it. So I'm always shopping around though. And I definitely, sometimes I buy from Dadent. It really just depends on where I can get the deal and the service. And oftentimes I don't find the service with the big companies. However, Jacinda at Kelly's is awesome. And that's one of the reasons why I buy from Man Lake. If it wasn't for Jacinda and Jennifer and a couple of the gals there at Kelly's, and Earl, I probably wouldn't buy half as much as I do from Man Lake. But they do a good job taking care of me. Leonardo, why don't you clip one wing on your queens to avoid them leaving? Well, a lot of times I don't take the time to grab the queens. I drop cells in and then I just let them go to town. Sometimes I mark them, sometimes I don't. But even if you do clip the queen's wing, let's say that you do that on all your queens, but this hive wants to swarm. They're going to take off and she might just fall out onto the grass. And then the bees will fall down onto her and then you'll have a swarm on the ground. However, if you don't find it for a week or so, the bees might go back to the hive and then you lost your queen and they'll go back to the hive. And then when one of the virgins emerge or multiple virgins, they'll go off with the virgins. So it can help. It can slow down swarms, but it's still not a cure all. And I don't find that necessary or something that I want to do. But some beekeepers use that. I got some queens ordered last year, and several of them had marked clipped wings and were marked, and I did not specify for that. But they're laying pretty good. So that's just kind of the reason why I don't. Yeah, exactly. It won't stop them from swarming, but I have heard, and this is not from experience. This is just from people that I trust that once those virgins emerge, then they'll leave with it, have a virgin swarm. Let's see. But yeah, for those of you who just came in, the experimental yard is just starting. I have not filmed the first video yet, but we haven't got the bees. There's a little bit of a delay there. It's no big deal. I'm not concerned by it at all. But the guy who's bringing them, the year's been a little bit behind, and it's been that way up here a little bit too, and that's fine. I'm glad because I'd rather it extend into June with the flow instead of being done early and then a bigger dearth for us. But that's gone down into Georgia as well, and so between that and also his sister, like on the day that he was scheduled to come up here and bring the nukes for the test yard, she was giving birth. Babies just, they just make their own time when they like to do things, kind of like queens. And, but it's no big deal. We'll get it done. We will have that experimental yard going very, very soon. And I'm excited. I've got that smoker from Hilco, and I was pretty shocked. I'm pretty a big fan of Dadent smokers, and honestly, if I was blindfolded, I would have never known the difference. Never would have known. I was pretty surprised. Let's see. When I went to move grafted queen cells to the nukes, several of the cap cells were dead in the cell, looked like mush. Any ideas? So current pest control, did you have them in an incubator? Did you shake them? Was there anything that could have compromised maybe the temperature of the cell? That sounds really odd. Sometimes they can get dislodged from the royal jelly above, and then they turn to mush in the bottom below. Ah, Ian's on. Have you had enough time to regather your ego? Always. Always. All I have to do is think about you know, Ian Stepler laughing at my video, and I'm just like, wow, that is just comedy gold right there. And if it makes a Canadian laugh, I must be that amazing. So that's the ego just came right back, Ian. Just like that. See, the problem is though, if you laugh at jokes like that, then when you come out here, then my bad jokes are just going to be all the more around. So you want to be careful. All right. So Ed Sawyer said that he bought from Hilco and he was really impressed. I'm going to be buying some more stuff and seeing what I think of it. I've got a Hilco extractor, and he gave it to me to. Well, he didn't give it to me. He let me have it to borrow, and I'll be doing a video on that as a thank you for donating all of that amazing stuff and assembling it for me and coming down here and installing the foundations. He helped me install the foundations of the Premiere and everything. And what are you laughing at? Oh, the comedy gold. Haha. Love the bad jokes. Yeah. See, you're way behind, Laurel. So we've already dealt with that. You're behind tonight, Laurel. I'm going to have to dock your pay. She just raspberried me. Gee whiz. No respect. Sure you do. You get to spend all day with me. That's the gift that keeps on giving. No. There went that ego again. That's I think that's why God made women to make men feel like that big. Is that all? Well, that's just a good enough reason there in of itself. You wouldn't want every man running around with knives and stuff, would you? That's our moms that kept us from doing that. Anyways, let's get off that topic before I dig a hole so deep we'll never get out of it. Oh, come on, John. That is a low blow. Hey, Claude Soley, speak for yourself. I live in Tennessee. We're not Yanks down here. So Ian knows Rodney Dangerfield. Okay. That is where a lot of it comes from. No respect. There we go. Conference 2022, where will we go to register? We're working on that a little, but we're just having a hard, we're keeping swarms. We're putting on honey supers, raising queens. We're doing all kinds of stuff right now, not to mention the test yard, which I just did mention. Interesting. And all that stuff. So we're going to try to have the conference available for sign up in summer when things maybe slow down a little bit. But I will definitely let you all know on here when the time comes. Got a nice loaded bunch of people coming. And if you guys know of any vendors or anything like that that you would like to see their products there, then just email me. I might not respond, but I'll probably see it, or Laurel will. And we'll try to contact. We're going to try to turn this into more of a trade show this year, since things are a little bit more loosened. Yeah, I know, Joseph. I am fighting a losing battle with her, but it's fun. I just like to see if I can just make a little bit of headway before she cuts me down. Who is this Ian person? Is he supposed to be important or something? Never heard of this supposed person. I'm sorry, Sean. Ian is he's an amazing Canadian guy. I know that sounds impossible, but he really is. And Ian has a beekeeping channel. If you haven't gone and seen it, it's definitely more on the professional side, way more than I do. Ian runs 1,600 colonies, very intense up in Canada, and he's a good guy. So you ought to check him out. It's the Canadian Beekeepers blog, and he's got a lot of good videos good tips, bad jokes, just Canadian bad jokes. All right, back to questions. Sounds like a man crush. It's called mutual respect. That's what it is. You and I have had a couple good laughs together. We did a live chat and all that kind of stuff. And besides, it's hard to find another guy on YouTube that I respect as much as Ian because he really doesn't mess around. Bob doesn't either, and there's a few others. But Ian was kind of like the first one on YouTube who actually had a no nonsense channel, in my opinion. That really went somewhere. So, what would be the best extractor for a 15 hive? So, 1,500 hives. Goodness, you watch Ian Stepler's video if you're talking 1,500 hives. Definitely some Cowan stuff, Cooks and Bills, lots of professional stuff that I don't know a whole lot about. Any trees you prefer for honey flows? Basswood is a great tree. If I was going to plant more trees in this area that are native, it would be basswood because they bloom later and the honey quality is really good. The timber is great as well. Basswood makes nice wood. So long term, it's just a good tree all the way around. Black locust is wonderful as well, but they get nipped, it seems like 50% of the time here in Tennessee in this area. So it's kind of as much missing as it is hitting. Tulip poplars in some areas can be a good tree. The honey's okay, and they're not the most consistent tree. I do really like poplar wood quite a bit, but we have poplars all over the place around here, but they're also a little sensitive to getting nipped early in the spring, not quite as much as black locust. Vitex bushes are really good. Sourwood, they're all right, but basswood, if I had to pick one tree that I would like to see more of around here, it would definitely be basswood, also called the linden. Let's see. What do you think of the Flow honey box? Well, I mean, it works as far as can it work? It can. But as far as is it practical? No, it's not. It's very expensive. Um, if you continue to watch my videos, and if you watch Ian's videos, you will see that, I mean, our hives, his especially, I think he gets 6 or 7 deeps on his. The most I ever put on mine is 6 deeps. This year I'll be doing more mediums, but I mean, these hives are really tall. That's what massive, strong honey production hives will do. So the only way I see a flow hive working for me in a sense that I won't have to worry about swarming so much and it makes sense is if I was having to use either several flow hives on one hive or I would have drawn combs. Either way, it makes no sense because if I have one flow hive and multiple boxes of regular drawn comb, I still have to have an extractor. I still have to pull boxes off. If I have multiple flow hives, I'm bankrupt. I mean, there's like $700 a pop, 600, whatever it is. And I would need at least 3 of those on one hive. And some people are like, well, why can't you just pull the honey out of it as soon as they fill it up? Because that's not how it works here. Maybe if you have long, slow flows, consistent flows, you can do that kind of thing. You can't here in Tennessee. I mean, I can get 100 plus pounds on an average year on a good colony of honey. 100 pounds is good for us. In a good year, I can get more than that. But that's going to take, like 2 flow hive boxes, and that all comes in under a month and a half. And it's not like just 3 weeks. Oh, okay, we're ready for this one box. Let's empty it and then reload it again. They're already swarmed at that point. You've got to have that head space. You've got to have that comb space. That nectar comes in almost as thin as water. So they've got to spread that out, fan it down. And also, the enzyme in their crop is helping it turn and invert into the wonderful product that we love called honey. And the flow hive is neat, but it's not practical. And so, it's just like there's a lot of stuff like that in beekeeping. A lot of stuff. So I'm not saying don't buy it, but that's how I feel about it. Let's see. Dr. Shah, well, welcome aboard. Yeah, Sean, I mean, I guess you can kind of eyeball it in there. Typically, you'd have to pull out frames to see if, kind of where you're at, especially if you're trying to pull it as soon as it's finished. Then, I would definitely want to look at those frames. And my general rule of thumb is, some people say it needs to be 70% capped. I will go a little bit less than that. Like if it's 50% capped and I shake it and I can't get anything to come out of there, it's done. That's the way I look at it. I also have a refractometer, and you'd be surprised how many combs that I've pulled that were only about 10% capped that actually were like 17% water content. But again, I was able to check that with the refractometer. It really surprised me, but it's one of those things where you kind of rather err on the side of caution, because the last thing you want to do is pull 100 pounds of honey and it ferment on you. That's a huge bummer, unless you're trying to make meat or something like that. Have you ever tried Better Comb synthetic wax pre-drawn comb? It's great for new beekeepers that don't have access to drawn comb in the first few years. I haven't used it. My good friend Frederick Dunn and Dansky's Bees have done videos on it, and if it's wired correctly, they love it, especially for brood. And yeah, it's a little pricey, but I could see where people could find that useful. Let's see. Kamon, do you have a source for the BB tree, also known as the Avodia tree? I don't, Russell. If somebody finds a decent one where it's not like $15, $30 a tree or something like that, let me know. Or if, basically what I would like to see is somebody who's in the nursery business take a bunch of these plants and sell bare root, BB trees, Avodias, basswood, sourwood, Vitex, several other things like that that beekeepers want to plant. But I mean, I'm not going to buy one tree for $20. Not going to do it. So, I'm looking at someone who's already dealing with a lot of volume and can handle a lot of, bulk sales. Because if I wanted to buy basswood, I'm wanting to spend, you know, probably about $1 a tree, the small little things, little bitty nursery size trees, and then probably buy like 500 of them to 1,000 and plant those. So I would love to see somebody who's in the nursery business do a little bit of a bee thing. And if they did and it was nice and reasonable, I would love to get behind that. Brian Reese, how's it going, man? Hope it's good there in Jersey. I think you're in Jersey, right? I'm pretty sure you're in Jersey. I get some people confused, but I'm pretty sure I got you right. You're crazy, man. I really do appreciate you, though. We'll have to do something about that before too long. Brian Reese is one of our biggest contributors to the experimental yard and just about everything else that we do. Oh, don't worry, I already got it taken care of. Yeah. Well, can you close the window for me? I've got all kinds of bugs coming through here. I'm just waiting for a honeybee to come in. By the way, so people ask me if I ever get stung or anything like that. Absolutely. And I went through this afternoon. Is a little over 60, probably 65 hives, and I didn't get stung in any of the hives. Prior to getting into any hives today, I got stung twice within about 20 seconds. The wind was blowing really hard, and it blew one right into my ear and stung me. And let me tell you, that really feels good. And then I got stung on the side of the head. And I think that alarm pheromone was spreading from this one and just brought that other one over here. But that's unusual. That's the first time I've had that happen all year. But those things can happen if you have bees. Just like if you're a carpenter, you're gonna get splinters. So I said, "Doggone it, shooting phooey, Laurel, get over here and help me pull this stinger out of my ear." And she said, "I guess so." Yeah, she's like, you have to buy me dinner tonight if I get it out. Of course, when you got a stinger in your ear, you just, yes, yes, yes. She's shaking her head over there. Let's, oh, you're not the punchline of my jokes. I'm the punchline of, no one takes me seriously. Maybe a little bit. Not on my jokes, anyways. Kamon are queens from a queenless builder finisher as good as a queenless builder queen right finisher? I believe that they are. I have shut the door, please. I have seen colonies that have, go in a super procedure and they're completely queenless that have raised some nice big cells. Some of them are inferior. A lot has to do with the condition of the colony. I think that's all that matters is the condition of the bees. Are there tons of nurse bees? Because it takes a lot to produce royal jelly. Is there plenty of nutrition so that they can do that? Are all of the things that are necessary to make a nice, healthy queen there? And as long as those are all present, then I think the queens are just as good with a queenless builder finisher as one that's queen right. That's my opinion. However, it is easier to make more queen cells and keep them in a queen right finisher, I think. Of course, the queen's down below. And I think that's just because you have the consistency of you have constant brood being raised. There's not as much hiccups. The bees don't feel as much stress. I think they have the pheromones from that queen below. It's more like swarming conditions. So I think it's easier for them to want to keep more cells. And you're using a bigger colony as opposed to a little 5-frame nuke. Pheromone pass between the ears. That's funny. Let's see. What part of Tennessee? I am North Middle Tennessee. Okay, best time to do an oxalic acid treatment with the new package. So, yes, what I like to do is install the package, and when I get it, I'm going to. It depends on how your queen cage is, but I'm going to make it to the queen candy is available on that first day. So stick that package in there, stick the queen down in there, and let them eat through that candy and get that queen out. And I wouldn't come back. Make sure you have some feed in there, even if it's just a quart of sugar syrup, just to get some feed to them. Bees always do better with some feed, and you want them to draw some combs out and get to laying. But I want to come back probably about 7 or 8 days. And then if you go in there and you see that the queen's laying eggs, do oxalic acid vapor right then. If you do it when they're clustered in the package, you don't get a very good kill because they're too tightly clustered. But if you do it when she's laying eggs, they're spread out on those frames. And once they've committed to the brood, even if there's larvae in there, that's good. You just don't want to get it too long where they've capped that brood. But once the queen started laying, they're locked in pretty well. I've never lost a package or any type of split that I've made once the queen's laying from oxalic acid vapor. How does the city's mosquito spraying affect your colonies? Well, if that mosquito spray actually gets onto your bees, then it actually could be quite negative. There's a lot of variables to this, though. It really depends on how close it is to the main colony. You could be losing a lot of forager bees. You could just lose a couple. If it's really close to the hives, it could cause massive damage. If you know if they're going to do it, then I would consider putting a sheet over the colony, making sure that they're ventilated enough to where they can get air and all that stuff, but also having a wet sheet or something like that over there to help just keep that initial spray. Those things are very short lived. So once it's gone through and it's set, it shouldn't be a problem. Not a big one at least. But if it hits your colonies, it's a pesticide. It'll wear them out. Hope Sadler, I took swarm cells and made 3 nukes 2 weeks ago. Either the queen didn't emerge or didn't get mated. Is it too late to requeen the hives? 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I would go in and just check one more time to be sure. If the weather's bad, sometimes it can take them a little while to get mated, but there's probably a good chance that she hasn't come back or they haven't come back. It is getting kind of late to requeen the hives. If you get a queen quickly, you probably can. But the longer you wait, the worse and the harder it's going to be to get those hives queen right. You can always, if you have other hives, you can pull a frame of eggs or larvae or something like that to kind of help keep them from wanting to going down that lane worker road, so to speak. Let's see. Tracy, how long to wait to drop a queen cell in after pulling and making a nuke? All right. That is a wonderful question. Tracy, thank you so much for the donation to our test yard. And the queen cells, literally, you can make the split. Typically, what I'll do is I'll go through a bee yard and I'll make however many splits that I feel like I want to. And then I will set them out and I'll drop the queen cells um, that evening, something like that. You can put them in immediately, but I usually do it at the end of the day. Let that way they know that they're queenless. If you have those queen cell protectors, I think I got some here. Hang on. We got all kinds of queen rearing stuff in here, so you can get these queen cell protectors, and that glare is no good. Let's get one of these out of here. And that way they don't chew them. Now, if it's on a frame, it's a different story, but most of the time I just put it in immediately. But I like to use these, and that way any bees that maybe still have any feeling like, we have a queen. Why do we have this queen cell over here? That kind of protects it. The bees won't chew through the bottom or the top. They'll just chew on the sides. So this kind of protects it a little bit. You can get these from pretty much any bee supply store. But I don't always use those either. But again, I feel like if I wait to the end of the day, they work a little bit better. Now, as far as queens go, you have to be careful, Tracy. If I make up a nucleus colony and I have mated queens, I want to put those queens in immediately. We want those new queens' pheromones to block any impulse of them raising their own queens off of the brood that they're going to have in the nuke or colony. And still, even after we put that queen cage in there, we're going to come back a week later, very gentle inspection. We're basically using maybe one puff of smoke in these little nukes. We're pulling the frames apart, getting to that middle frame, hoping to see that queen's laying, and we're going to check a frame or two and make sure they're not raising any queen cells. Sometimes, even with a good mated queen, they'll just continue to raise a queen cell. And then if that happens, you might have a wonderful queen that you purchased, but that virgin will emerge out of that queen cell and kill your mated queen. Older queens that have been laying typically are not good about destroying cells. Virgins are good about destroying queens and cells, but mated queens and laying queens they're only focused on laying. That's a different situation. I just wanted to go ahead and explain that too. But whenever I make nukes, I put my mated queens in immediately. Cells, you can pretty much do the same. I do like to wait a few hours if possible, though, just so that nuke or whatever it is knows I'm queenless. They get it pretty quick. I think it improves my cells slightly just to wait a couple hours. And that's why I usually do it at the end of the day. Let's see here. I meant to mention that I did put very young larvae in each one, and they ignored it. Are they just a lost cause? Well, hope them, and maybe so. I wouldn't say that they're wasted necessarily, but it might be something where you just want to combine it back with another colony and beef that colony back up. Maybe order a queen and then make a split whenever that queen comes in, and that way those bees have been combined with a normal colony that has a laying queen, and they all get back where they need to be. And then when you make that split, you make a balanced split. So maybe combining them back and then having a queen ordered, and whenever that comes, then making the split with the necessary components would be wiser. I think it would. Those older bees that you bring back to that colony are just going to help with the foraging. And then when you make your split for that new queen, if you do want to make one, it's going to be mostly nurse bees, which makes acceptance way higher. Five days in with grass, can I still reintroduce the queen to make a queen right finisher or start over next time? You don't have to have a queen right finisher. My Mark, I have to be careful. That's the way I prefer it, to have a queen right finisher. There are people who use queenless finishers that are powerful. There's little ones. There's so many multiple ways to raise queens. One of my friends does monster colonies that are absolutely queenless, and he uses them as a starter finisher. They're double deeps, and they're just ridiculously strong. There's several different ways to do this. So, I mean, if that way is working for you and accomplishing what you need, then keep on with it. I'm going to try to do a video for too long on our finisher setup and our starter that we're using for raising queens. Not the 5 frame nuke setup, but the bigger thing that we use for selling and making queens for our operation. All right, let's see. Can you talk a little bit about the different type of bees? Which ones are good for cold climate? I lose bees in the winter every year. So this is a complicated and a highly debatable topic. Also, some people get darn upset over this. And my opinion is a good quality queen is going to do well as long as she goes into winter with plenty of healthy bees and has good, doesn't have a lot of pest problems with nosema or anything like that, varroa. They have the nutrition, they're going to do good. Ian has said before that some of his queens are coming from like Kona. Now, obviously, he has Carrie raising a lot of the queens now, but in the past he has purchased, and some of their breeders come from lines that are not from Canada. I really think quality is more important than anything. You have a quality queen and a healthy cluster of bees. That's the first step. So you can get that with Italian, you can get that with Carnies, you can get that with a lot, but you can also not get that with those as well. Personally, I think you would find that Carnies would work better up north just because of their natural tendencies. But there are people in Canada who use Italians. So, and other places that are really cold. Quality is number one. Carnies, I think, are better because they're more conservative. I like them down here in Tennessee, and we have very mild winters. But they will die down here, let me tell you. And you got to have a good cluster. We don't get cold. I think the coldest night that we had here, we got like in the teens, Fahrenheit. And we did lose a couple colonies out of that. I was trying to overwinter some really tiny stuff just to bank some queens, kind of, in little 3-frame splits, and they did not handle that cold well. My big colonies, they were eating pollen patties during that period, and when I finally got back out there, was still snow on the ground, and they were ready to eat more. They were powerful clusters, and they were hot. You could put your hand over them, and they're just warm. So I think Carnies would be the best place to start. But again, I really think it's more about the quality of the bee and the conditions that they're going into winter. If bees go into winter healthy, typically they come out of winter healthy. That's the way I look at it. Now, it's more complicated further up north, so there's more variables to that. But that's really all I can say, because I don't. Tennessee is my beekeeping experience. Not cold here. I like Carnies though. Like them for a lot of reasons. Let's see. 20 supersedure cell. Supersedure cell versus swarm cells. Are supersedure cells always on the frame and swarm cells always on the bottom of the frame? That is a myth. I've seen that a lot on Facebook recently, and it's a myth. These colonies that are swarming, typically, I'd say 90% of the cells are on the bottom. That's where they like to put them. But let's think about this for a second. Why are the queens laying in those queen cups? Do you think they go around and they just like, you know what? I think it's time to swarm. The queens aren't thinking that. They're just thinking, oh my goodness, I got to get these eggs out of me. There are bees that encourage them to lay over around those cells. And I also feel like the queens just, especially during swarm season, they have to lay. They just got to get those eggs out. So they just lay in any crevice, any spot. And the reason that we don't see eggs, I think sometimes in places where they shouldn't be, is because the bees, it's like, that's not a cell. They just cannibalize and conserve that nutrition. I think the queens this time of the year are just laying wherever they can. But that means also if she lays in a queen cup that's 3/4 of the way up and it's swarm season, that's going to be a swarm cell. So that doesn't mean it's a supersedure. And these colonies that swarmed on me, when I got in there and checked those colonies, I probably had 3 or 4 in each one of them that was not on the bottom. So you have to watch out for those. Also, one thing that you have to consider is what is bottom. So let's say we have a double deep colony and we have our top bars of our bottom box. So this is the top of the bottom box. You got the frames and those top bars. And then you have this other box above. Well, you would think the bottom is going to be the bottom of these frames. But to the bees, the top of that top bar could be the bottom too. Because sometimes they'll extend that comb down. They'll have burr comb going between the bottom of these frames and the top of these frames. And they'll build that down onto that top bar. And that's the bottom. That just extends right on down, and they'll build a swarm cell on the top bar of the bottom box. So the whole thing with if it's on the side or the bottom, it doesn't matter. And then supersedure is the same way. Supersedure cell, they'll have some towards the bottom too. You just got to watch it. If they're making cells, keep an eye out for them, especially if it's swarm season. They could literally be anywhere. And all it takes is missing one. Could you make a video showing how to treat an Apomae with oxalic acid? I will try to do that. It's been on my list I've got a long list of things to do videos on. It's just hard to get around to some of these things. And also I've got to take the time to rig it up. Right now, I've just been holding it at one of the holes of the entrance and shooting it. But there's several guys who have made some mods for their Apomae hives that work really good. If you follow me on Facebook, I'm going to share. I'll try to do that tonight or tomorrow. I will share a picture of what some guys are doing with their Apomae so they can use their oxalic acid, ProVap 110s, and Laura B vaporizers and stuff like that. So there's several people here like Mike and JD and several people that are saying nice things. Keep up the great work. Love your channel and appreciate hearing your views and opinions. I really appreciate you. I'm seeing some of these comments. I can't get to everything. I apologize, but I really do appreciate the encouraging words and everything. Michael Palmer said that Italians rob more than Carnies. That's one of the reasons why we have more Carnies than we do Italians. I have very few Italians left. I don't like. It's one of my least favorite things about bees. If I had the choice of eliminating bee stings or robbing from bees, I would totally go robbing. Easy decision. I hate it. I can take some bee stings, but robbing drives me nuts. But Carnies are less inclined to rob. They totally will, though. I'm in Camden, Tennessee, but know nothing about beekeeping, so I'm here to learn. Well, I tell you, it wasn't that long ago I knew nothing, and some people would argue I still don't know anything. But we're all just learning together for sure. Yeah, the University of Gulf is another wonderful channel. I really enjoy all the videos that they've produced that I have seen. They've been exceptionally good. This is something I need to address. Kamon, we've been seeing you use the Reflectix inner covers. What's your opinion so far? Also, could you say a bit about the advantages of running all deeps? All right. Well, let's take the first question, the Reflectix inner covers, because I get this question a lot. They work. They're good. They're not perfect. Sounds like everything else in beekeeping. They're about $1 a piece. Last time I priced them, prices have gone up a little bit, but $1 is not that bad. However, if you have a feeder rim, I really like them. When I've those feeder rims that I have around my lids, I can put a pollen patty, and that pollen patty will just push it up into that space up there while still maintaining that seal around the lid. I really like that. I feel like it helps mostly, in wintertime here, again, super mild winter. I don't think it helps me in the winter. Where it helps me is those spring periods, or maybe those last few days of winter where the bees are brooding up and I'm getting in the hives and it's resealing it for me. I think it really helps keep that heat in. I'm a fan of no upper entrance. So these go right along with that. It's a little annoying sometimes pulling these things back, and it does irritate the bees a little bit, but not necessarily a whole lot more than popping a really glued on inner cover. It's cheaper than an inner cover. You can buy a lot of these for the price of an inner cover. So, I mean, they work pretty good. It's not super insulative. If you were wanting something that is going to help a lot more, I would say go R5 or something like that. Get a nice foam board and paint it so the ants and bees won't chip it up, and use that instead if you're really wanting something that's going to give some insulative properties. But if you're wanting just something to seal the lid and just help keep the heat in a little bit more, they do a really good job, and the price is very reasonable. So I purchased 100 of them, and I've been using them. I'm still on the fence if I'm going to use them on everything. It's not really that they're bad, but I'm just wondering if I want to use these or if I want to just go all the way and go to like an R5 to overwinter with instead, foam board. And I think it's helpful here, even in Tennessee. So next question, what about running all deeps? Well, everything's the same. I just can't say enough how useful that is. I'm going to all medium supers now because of weight. It's just the deeps are super heavy. I don't have any fancy lifts. I do have a lift. I'm going to try. I'm working on a video, I promise. It has its issues, though. I'm not a huge fan of the forks on this lift, but the actual box lift works pretty good. But I have to set up my bee yard around it. But everything's the same. It's easy to draw combs when you can pull up a deep frame with larvae in it and you're pulling it up into another deep comb. If you're trying to do that to a medium, you can't. Can't pull a deep of brood up into a medium box. There's also when you're making splits, or if everything's the same. One size fits all. And then when you're uncapping, I've got that Silver Queen uncapper, and it can only be set for one frame type size at a time. So if I'm running it all deeps, I can't throw a medium into the mix or it'll chew up the frame. And I can drop it in there if I time it. You can still do it. But the whole idea of it is to not have to time it, is to just load the thing up and let it automatically take them. So I've got it set for mediums. I'm going all mediums. Lots of pros and cons. And the expense of it, that's another big part. It's a lot more expensive to go to smaller boxes, shallows and mediums, because you have more frames. Especially with shallows, you have twice as many frames as you do deeps to cover the same amount of comb, basically. And they're not that much cheaper than a deep frame, really. And then think about wiring. So, it makes a lot of sense for a business to run all deeps. However, my back does not agree with those things. And, Laurel does a ton of the work around here. And so between the two of us, we've just decided that, we're not looking at going to, big forklifts and Ian Stepler lifting mobiles and all kinds of stuff. So we dropped it to mediums. Yeah, I mean, like Matthew McCormick said, fan of all 10 frame deeps, makes it easy and less equipment to buy. Yeah, that's one of the things Wallace Hives talks about, or Donna Wallace. I use the pink foam board on all of their hives during winter and some hives during the summer. I've heard from people who use them in the summer that it really helps with colonies getting too hot and having to work a lot more to cool the colony down. And if that's the case, then that means there's less stress in summertime. Kamon, is it possible to raise queens with only 2 small hives? Well, JD, I have a video on how to raise queens with a 5-frame nuke. You're not going to raise hundreds of queens with the system, but if you're just wanting to raise a handful, 3, 4, 5 at a time, you could do a couple rounds, 10 maybe. If you do it really good, you can get dozens out of it. But yeah, you can do it. I've got several videos on it. If anyone's wondering, I have a playlist on my YouTube channel. You can find a lot of these things, specifically queen rearing, pollen patty stuff, in the playlist, and you can find what you want a lot faster than just typing through YouTube and trying to search things. But yeah, you can do it. And I will say I love raising queens, not just for the fun of it, but the quality. Oh my goodness. So much better than what you can buy. Do you like plastic frames? The bees don't seem to care. I don't like plastic because they slide around all over the place. They're slick. They have more crevices for small hive beetles to hide, but I'm not sure that actually makes that big of a difference, in my opinion. But it's just, I don't like the feel of plastic frames. I don't mind plastic foundation with a wooden frame. But there are several people who like the solid plastic frames. I don't really like, that's the only thing about the Apomae hive system I really don't like, because I don't like the feel of the plastic frames. They work, but I just don't like the feel of them. They slide too easily. They're brittle in cold weather. All that stuff. I missed something. I missed a lot of somethings. Yeah, well, the deep boxes are quite heavy, and that's the thing right now is last year, I'm 32. I can handle deep boxes full of honey. I can, and I can throw them on my truck. But after doing that for a week, if you don't have the proper equipment, it's going to take its toll on your back. And I did some stuff to myself back when I was doing truck driving because I was a he-man, and I'm still paying the price for it. And I have no desire to screw my back up and have it messed up at 50 or 60 years old. So that's the reason that we did it. I think if you had a good lift system, Deeps makes a ton of sense. But personally, my wife helps a lot. My kids are starting to help, and they were helping me move boxes around. They were empties with drawing combs, but they were handling medium boxes, and they could physically move the medium. So that's again why it's more of a family decision. How do I get rid of a laying worker? The only way that I found that kind of gives somewhat decent results with laying worker is to drop a queen cell in there. I have extra queen cells if it's early stages of laying worker. What I will do, let's say they're 6 frames of bees or even 3 frames. It doesn't really matter, but somewhere in that, and they have just started laying worker eggs. First thing I want to do is go to a colony and find some young larvae or eggs, and I want to drop that in there, primarily because I want them to stop doing that. I don't want them raising a bunch of drone brood and messing my combs up and widening them out. So I want to put that in there. That young brood will change the pheromone dynamics in there, and so it'll really suppress that tendency. And then I'm going to drop a queen cell. If you drop a queen in there, there's a good chance she's going to get killed. If you drop a queen cell in there, a lot of times it'll accept it. And if you're out of a queen cell, and like me, I've got extras at times, it's not a big deal. It's not like losing a mated queen. Excuse me. But other than that, I shake them out. If it's too far along, there's not a whole lot to fool with. Just shake them out. Move on to the next colony. We really, most of the time, unless we just have extra queen cells, we just shake them out. We focus on our champs and not the wimps. I know it's different when you just have a few hives. I understand that. I used to do that too, but It's just different when you have hundreds. If queens last 3 to 4 years, why would you raise queens? What do you do with 3 to 6 queens when only 2 hives that are doing well? Well, I disagree with the common, somewhat common held thing that queens will last 3 or 4 years. I think by and large that's hogwash. There are some queens that last 3 or 4 years, but they're not very good. Very rare that a queen in its third year or fourth year is worth much. And I don't let my queens go that long. And there's also a difference on location. Your queens aren't going to last as long if you're in Florida as they will up in Ohio. Your queens are laying a whole lot more. And it's just a matter of math. And queens can only last so long. And young queens do a lot of things better than old queens. I mean, let's say a queen does last 4 years. So in her third year, she'd basically be 75 if they live 100. So let's say the average person, if we're equating them to human years, so let's say the average person lives 70, she's going to be 50 something years old in her third year or something like that. I'm 32. I'm not quite, I don't bounce quite as good as I did at 22. I don't expect 52 to be that great as far as bouncing. I don't think there will be any bouncing at that point. According to my dad, there's no bouncing at that point. But what I'm saying is queens don't last productive years that long. They don't. I'm actually more and more going towards keeping young queens in my operation. They do so much better in a lot of ways. I think they help keep the hive clean. They're more resilient to pest problems. They lay more brood, and that means a lot of good things. Not only does it mean honey crop, from financial, a lot of people think, oh, well, you're just trying to make the most out of your bees. No, it's also it's survival. They do so much better at surviving. If you have a young queen going into winter, she has the same population as a 2 or 3 year old queen, she is going to outlay and outperform. And she's going to go into winter with a much bigger cluster, and she's going to come out of winter with a much bigger cluster because she produced more winter bees. And I know a lot of people don't want to off queens. I totally get that. So my suggestion is if you're wanting to get the best of both worlds, then take your 3 hives or whatever the number is, make nukes out of those old queens, requeen your production colonies. If something happens to either group, you have the 3 that you wanted to have. If you end up with too many, you sell nukes for $185 a pop. Or 200 or whatever your area is. I don't know, but I'm a big fan of keeping queens young. Bob Benny at our conference, he gave a wonderful talk on queen longevity and a lot of data, technical data, nuts and bolts on queen age. Queens don't last as long as we think they do. So I replace my queens almost yearly these days. Yep. And it really helps in a lot of ways. Success rates, percentages go up, honey production goes up. It's easier to keep your bees from swarming when the queens are younger. Younger queens produce more pheromones. The better she's doing at all those things, the less likely they are to swarm. So there's a lot of reasons to keep young queens. What's the safest way to make the most splits if you want to build hives? So New Jersey, $250 for a nuke. Hey, Brian, do you want to come out here and work out a deal where I can sell mine to you for 200 and you take them up there for 250? I'll get a nice premium and you can make some money too. Oh, gee whiz. But yeah, that's usually how it goes though. Further north you get, the more expensive. Sorry, I missed something. I interrupted myself. What's the safest way to make the most splits if you want to build hives? Dentist asks. So I have tried a lot of splits throughout the summer, and I don't know your location. For me, the most successful way to make splits is to take a strong production colony after the honey flow or prior to the honey flow and break it down right in the middle. So that's at least a deep for the original colony and a deep for the new colony. Those are strong. Some people will break those in 3 ways. If I start making splits now, if I take all of my colonies and broke them down to 5 frame nukes, I could go to 1,000 colonies. No problem. You want to talk about a lot of work, though, then feeding those up and maintaining those in the bee yards and all that stuff. And, Laurel's, I don't think she'd be cool with that. But seriously, you could do that right now. If I tried to do that in late June or July, it would be really rough. It'd be hard to get it done successfully. Bees don't want to brood heavily for me in the summer dearth, and they don't even want to do it a lot in the fall. I can't seem to get near the success rate, and I think there's good reasons for this, to get those August and summer made splits as the ones that I do right at June, early June, or prior to that. They just are more successful in every way. So I think there's got to be a balance to this. I'm still learning on my season and trying to get as many splits as I can, but I'm finding more and more trying to make too small a splits or too many splits is just a good way to lose a lot of bees and just have a bunch of weaklings come out of winter. A lot of the guys I talked to that had a lot of issues this year, and I think they're good beekeepers, but they lost a lot more bees than I did, is they ran a lot of small colonies through winter, and the winter was a little rough. And those little clusters just don't handle it like the big boys do, or the big girls. Personally, I think tripling a year I think that's plenty. If you have 7 hives and you go to 21, next year you go to 60 something if you can keep them all alive. That's pretty stellar growth. You can do more than that, but I'm not sure. You kind of got to grow with your bees. Let's see. I saw something about where can you get a wax dipping tank? So mine was a chicken scalder. It was a scalding tank that I had back when we used to raise thousands of chickens and process them. And I was talking to my buddy in Hawaii, and I visited him a few years ago, and we did some wax dipping over there. And I was thinking to myself, man, after all this other bee stuff that I've purchased, there's no way Laurel's going to let me buy a wax dipping tank. Man. And then I was like, oh, wait a second. That scalder I have is basically the same thing. I don't know of any particular place that is selling wax dipping tanks right now. But basically, it's just a tank with a propane burner underneath and a few other odds and ends. It's nothing super fancy. Let's see here. Oh, hey, Hi-Fi. How's it going up there in Kentucky? We were just talking about you. They just didn't know I was talking about you. You're the one of the guys that has the Apomae rigged oxalic acid vapor. I've seen 2 different ways, and yours is one of them for using the vaporizer. So I'm actually, if I think I'm going to use your pictures, if that's all right, Hi-Fi, and post them on my Facebook account so people can duplicate that if they choose. Yeah, and Hi-Fi is talking about wax dipping tanks too. Second year beekeeper, what time of year would you want to start preparing to make your own queens? Jay Mayton. I don't know where you live, Jay. Here in Tennessee, though, I usually go for, it depends on the year, but usually towards the end of March, 3rd week of March, I think is when we started this year. So back in 2008 and 2012 and some of those years where it was extremely mild and warm here, you could do it 2 weeks earlier than that. There was plenty of drones. The weather was warm. The last couple of years has been a little bit cooler. So, you just kind of take it as it comes. I don't like to push it though. I want to see plenty of drones. I want to see plenty of pollen. I want to see some big colonies too. Typically when the bees are wanting to swarm is typically a great time to start raising queens. Let's see. Nukes, man, expensive nukes. You think that's a lot? They're selling bee weaver 4-frame nukes for $350 to $370. That is a lot for 4 frames, especially if they're mean. I know some people say that they're gentle. I just ran into another guy that had some bee weavers that just ripped him to shreds. Let's see here. Have you ever thought about doing a first week, few months class? I have, Kaylee. I just having a hard time finding the time for those kind of things right now. Just a lot of things that I just redid my extraction room. I say I did. Laurel and I did. We haven't even finished that. Just got my bottling system back up and running over the last couple of weeks. Got this test yard going in. Obviously, there's videos. Then we got to fit some family time in there somewhere. And then there's the honey production and swarm season and queen rearing and nucleus colony cells and all of that stuff. And I would love to do some hands-on courses. We were just talking about that today. I just don't know when we're going to find the time for it. And if anything, we need to gear back so we can have, I need some time away from the bees, to be honest. How often do you check for queen cells? This time of the year, I am checking once a week. It doesn't have to be long, just popping them. And I'm pulling the bees back. I'm checking once a week on those colonies that I think that could swarm. There's a lot of colonies like nucleus colonies and queen rearing colonies. We're not checking them every week. Honey production colonies are quite a little bit more intensive. There's usually a few weeks during the year where swarming is just really strong, and we're right in the middle of that. The first nectars are really coming in good, and that's usually the hardest period because we have tons of hardwood pollens. Now we have nectar coming in. Queens are laying full throttle, and they're all vying for space in the brood nest, and that's why having those drawn supers above that brood nest of drawn combs where they can move that nectar out of the way really helps. But still, that first surge of nectar really is the trick. And I really feel like over the next couple weeks, things will mellow out quite a bit. And the bees, once they commit to putting that honey or nectar above the excluder and focusing on bringing in that honey crop, it really retards that significantly. Hey, ECP, good to see you. Yes, this is a Dirt Rooster hat. I thought I'd wear it. I talked to Randy night before last, and he's doing pretty good down there in Louisiana. We were cutting up and carrying on. He's a pretty nice guy. Let's see. Is there a reason to add an empty box to the bottom of the hive? Seen some videos where they do this to build up a package that doesn't have drawn comb. I have never thought doing that was a great idea in my own personal opinion. I don't see why. Let's say you had a 10 frame deep and they've drawn 8 frames in it. Then you're going to pick that box up and drop another one below so they'll go down there and draw that. No, I'm not going to do that. I think the bees want to go up more, but there are some methods out there where they do undersupering like that. Now it's different. Let's say you have a honey production colony. You're running double deeps, and you've got 3 mediums or whatever your system is, and you're wanting to draw some foundation out. You're not going to stick that foundation box on the top. You can, but if you're wanting to get it drawn quickly, then you're going to pick up those drawn combs and put it underneath. Some people will put it on top, but I like the foundation needs to be close to the brood nest, but I believe it needs to be on top of the brood nest. But I always wait to really start drawing foundation until after I put on the drawn combs. And, basically I'll put on the drawn combs and then I'll put on a foundation later or something like that if I'm wanting to get more foundations. Kamon, what do you do during the day? Don, come on, man. I sit around here telling Laurel what to do because, she totally lets me do that. Not. And no, it's just basically like I've just got, lists and lists of things. I've got literally on this table, I've got about 8 lists going on right now. Some are specifically for videos that I need to get done. Setting up the test yard, what all needs to happen before he gets here. Just lots of things. Lists. I live and die by my lists and losing them. Let's see. We have sugar ants like crazy here in Western North Carolina. We have Apomae hives. What's your suggestion on keeping them from being attracted as much? See, that's an issue. One of the reasons why I don't like the Reflectix covers during our summers or even springs is you can get ants that'll build between the lid and the Reflectix. And they'll also do it with the foam boards, and they'll also do it with an inner cover. Anywhere that the bees cannot patrol, you can get ant problems here. Hey, Nicole, thanks for coming on and staying on so long. Hope you have a good spring with your bees. But getting back to Kaylee's comment, so keeping those ants out can be really hard in an Apomae hive. And any hives that are like that or have feeders on top, because those ants can get into small little areas and your bees can't patrol that. Some people will set their hives into like little vegetable oil moats or water moats, and the ants can't cross it and get up the hive. But honestly, I'll deal with a little bit of ant problems if I have to. But yeah, there's some people will put some diatomaceous earth there as long as the bees can't get access to it to help keep the ants out. There's a couple other things that you can do. Some people say cinnamon works. I don't think it does, but some people say it does. I don't really know. I just typically don't fool with hive setups that don't allow the bees to patrol. That's one of the reasons why I'm thinking about taking all the Reflectix off of my lids right now, which is just one more thing to do because I won't have to worry about any ants or roaches or anything like that getting between the lid and the inner cover or Reflectix. Well, yeah. Yeah. Can you explain foundation frames versus normal frames? What does it mean to be a foundation frame? So, Clayton, you have a frame of comb or you have a frame with foundation in it, or you could have foundationless frames where there's nothing in it. And some people do that. I'm not a fan of that method. Have tried it extensively. I didn't like it. But literally a foundation is just that there's wax foundation. That's just pure beeswax. And that's one type of foundation, or there's plastic foundation with a little bit of wax put onto it. Both of those work really well. I feel like the coverage of wax on the plastic is the most important aspect of it. And I've actually been drawing some Premier foundations. There was a few extras that weren't needed for the test yard, and so I decided to use them on a colony that looked like it was ready to draw some combs. And I think the reason that they take to it so well, there's multiple reasons, but they're drawing it wonderfully. They put so much wax on it, and it's such high quality wax. Bees repurpose wax. Now, if you set out a big bin of wax, they don't really heavily forage wax. They will go out and collect a little bit of it. I'm not sure that they actually bring it in the hive and use it as necessarily drawing combs, but I think that they might mix it with propolis and use that for capping cells or sealing things up. I don't know. Love to see more research on this. But if you set out a bunch of, you don't see them just foraging it like crazy. But inside of the hive, they will repurpose wax quite a bit. Actually, I've been seeing this a lot with my nucleus colonies where I'm making them up with 2 frames of brood. And then you throw in 3 foundations. My brood frames are brown from use. And then the new wax is going to be white. But you'll see on those white foundation frames as they're drawing them out, there'll be brown mottled areas, or sometimes it's pretty brown where they're pulling some wax from the other frame that maybe isn't necessary, and they're repurposing it over on the other side. I think this happens with plastic foundation. And if you have plastic foundation that has extra wax on it, they will repurpose that to draw it out faster. Obviously, they have to be in the mode to draw, or they're just going to pick it and chuck it. And they'll do the same thing with wax foundation, pure wax foundation, or plastic foundation. If they are not in the mode to draw and it's in there for a long time, they will pick the wax out and put holes in your wax foundation, or they will just pick it down to plastic on your plastic foundation, and neither one is much good without wax. Let's see. Well, Hi-Fi has been keeping Apomae for a lot longer than I have. Actually, Hi-Fi was at our conference and he was showcasing Apomae equipment there. Since Apomae couldn't be there, they asked if he would do it, and Hi-Fi graciously agreed to. And it was really nice to get this. A lot of people had never seen one up close, and I think a lot of people have the idea that they're a really weak plastic. They're not. You could knock somebody out with those lids. And so I think a lot of people were interested, especially in the pollen trap. Love those. Don't forget the honey-do list. Oh my goodness, it is the honey-do list is legit right now. Drop 200 honey supers this week. And there's not a check on that one yet. Working on it. It's going to happen this week. Okay. See how get caught up. Found closed swarm cells and no eggs. Move queen 3 feet and nuke tomorrow is the plan. Better idea. So, okay. Sounds like swarming is happening in a hive. You move the queen so they won't swarm with that queen. I think that'll work pretty good. However, it's not 100% sure that one of those virgins might hatch out. If they still have that swarming stimuli, they might leave with the virgins instead. However, if the swarming tendency wasn't too high, pulling that queen might knock them out of it. I don't know. But yeah, it was a good move to pull the queen out because they were going to swarm. Once the queen stops laying and they've capped swarm cells, I mean, I pretty much expect them to swarm. I mean, it's unless you get that queen out of there. But a lot of times she's slimmed down and she's running around all the hive, and it's hard to find queens in big colonies. But if you can find that queen and move her to another nuke, that would be good. You could even recombine it later. See, that's kind of what I'm thinking. If you're not wanting to increase, you could actually crush those swarm cells as long as you find the queen, make a nuke with her, and then you can recombine her back 5 or 6, 7 days later when the other hive has given up on raising queens. And you might have to go in there and crush some supersedure cells, which will probably happen. They'll be like, oh my goodness, we've lost our queen. Now we're raising supersedure cells to fix the colony. And you'll have to smash those and then reintroduce your queen, which she should reintroduce pretty easily. And then you're back in business. It's a little intensive though. Or you could just make a split. Hey, Blue Sticks. Good to have you on. I appreciate you coming on and trying out the live chats. We do this probably once every 3 weeks, something like that. Do you put this year's queens in the nukes that you sell? Since you requeen every year, seems like you could take last year's queen to put in a nuke and this year's queens in your hives. We don't use 1-year-old queens to sell. Now, we will use some queens from the season before sometimes. By and large, our queens are spring queens. Our nukes have spring queens. However, we do raise some queens, in August and September, and I have no problem with selling those in a nuke. They haven't had hardly a chance to lay at all, and they'll do a very good job. Obviously, if they survived winter and build up good and have good patterns, they're actually very proven. But I wouldn't make a queen in May and then sell it a year later in May. That queen's already went through a lot, went through a prime part of the season. But I would say 90+%, 95% of all of our nukes come from late March grafts and early April grafts and early spring queens. Have you considered using supers full of plastic cassettes to harvest comb honey? Comb honey should bring a higher return on investment. Well, it does bring a good bit of amount of money, but you'd also have to do a lot more to it. And if you watch the video on how we process honey, and I've streamlined it more for this year, we're all about low maintenance. And I totally think more people should do comb honey, but it doesn't fit my business model. It's just too labor intensive. And also, I've never done comb honey before. I don't know a whole lot about using those cassettes. The hog half comb method seems pretty good. I like the look of that one. I don't really like the idea of Ross rounds myself. I've seen a lot of people say that they didn't like it. A lot of people. I've never seen anybody say they hated the hog half comb. And I kind of like the wooden sections. Makes it a little bit more classy. But anyways, yeah, you make more money. Well, it's a lot like how I sell my honey. I don't sell it for max profit. I sell at a price that the people who buy it from me at 24, 36, 48 bottles at a time, that my smallest customer takes over 50, let's see, yeah, 50 bottles like twice a month. No, 50 pounds twice a month. So that would be 50 bottles a month of 2 pounders. So that's a lot of money right there. And I can deliver that all in one shot. It's quick, it's simple, it's easy. No, I don't get $10 a pound, but I've got barrels of honey downstairs I need to move before we get more honey. And I don't have time to go to a farmer's market every weekend. And even if I did, I could only go to one. My honey's being sold at several. And also several stores. And I'm not having to do any of that. And if you guys have noticed, I have a weakness. It's running my mouth. It can be useful sometimes, but it's also like a double-edged sword. And I love talking bees. And Laura doesn't like letting me go to farmers markets and stuff or anywhere like that, because if I do, people ask me bee questions, and I'm literally at the farmers market all day. I love talking bees. Okay. So, but that's not very profitable, is it? It's also not very good if you want to spend some quality time with your family later that evening on Saturday. So I'm selling it at a price where they can buy it. Some of these people are buying $700, $800 for the honey at a time, and then they take it and they make off of that probably $400 net profit. And they promote it. They deal with the money exchange, all that stuff. I love that system. Um, but no, I don't get $10 a pound. But my customers seem to like that system, and I really do too. I really like that. Doesn't make sense if you're doing it on for 5 hives, but when you're doing a lot of honey, I think it's a great model. It's kind of bridges the gap between selling bulk drums of honey for a very low price, and also $10 a pound, which seems to be the average price. Hey, Garrett Biko, thanks again, buddy, for helping our channel. I really appreciate you very much. I hope you have a really good bee season. Appreciate you coming on here and ask questions if you ever need anything. All right. And Landon Rodriguez, thank you so much as well. I really appreciate you. I'm not sure. I know we have another Landon on here, so maybe you've done before, but if not, thank you for donating for the first time, unless I'm wrong. Let's see. I had a good question up here. I missed it. Doggone it. This thing jumps around on me. It really does. Kamon, do you sell 5-gallon buckets of honey? Not really. I have one customer that I sell 5-gallon buckets of honey to, and I get a premium for it, and they take it and they make elderberry syrup like nobody's business. And they love, it's nice for me. She gets a little bit of a discount, obviously, because I don't have all the labeling and bottling into it. So I can just fill up a 5-gallon bucket, but I still get a good price for a 5-gallon bucket for that. But I don't really do a lot of that. I really like selling just cases. And I love seeing the people that I'm selling to make money. I love seeing how it's helping them, because a lot of these folks are, farmers market folks or have nice stores, and I want to see them successful. A lot of them are my friends, and so I see them making money off of our product, and it brings more people to their store, and it brings more people to their farmers market booth, and so they buy more fruits and vegetables from them while they buy our honey. I just love that system. And again, I have more time to do videos and more time to raise queens or make money elsewhere. I don't feel like I'm losing money. I feel like I'm just making more money in other ways. Okay. All right, so I installed packages into my Apomae hives with new Man Lake plastic foundations. They have a constant sugar, water, and dry food. How much comb should they have drawn out after a week? 2 weeks. Thanks. Well, packages can be a little tricky because if you have two packages and they're somewhat close together, and one queen is better pheromone wise than the other, which can happen with packages, then there's going to be some drift happening. So they both might have been 3 pounds apiece, but then you might end up with one that's 4 pounds and one's 2 pounds, or even 1 pound and 5 pounds. So you got to take that into account. But if they're both pretty even size and population, I would feed them a thin syrup 1 to 1. So 1 pound sugar, 1 pound of water, or use only 3/4 of a pound of sugar to 1 pound of water. Make it a little bit thin. You'll have to feed a little bit more, but that works really good too. I usually, right now, I'm feeding, if I have to feed anything, very thin syrup. And I like that. In a week, I would expect to see out of a package, I don't know, work 4 or 5 frames, not finished, but, working on them. And after 2 weeks, you're not going to see just this phenomenal growth because what with a package, you have a ticking clock. As soon as you get that, I mean, those bees there's no brood. Bees don't live that long. And these bees obviously are no spring chickens. They've been around already for a handful of days. And for a bee, that's a lot. So the forager bees, I mean, shoot, you might lose some of those within the first week. The nurse bees, you got a bit of time, but from the time the bee emerges, you've got 5-6 weeks. And let's assume they're at least a week old. Some of them more than that. So you've got to get that next generation. So before too long, your population is going to be dwindling, and it will. And as long as you get that turnaround on that first brood, once you do that, the population starts increasing. But until you start actually growing that population, that cluster can only draw so much comb. They can't draw a ton. So just as far as the feed goes, make sure you feed enough. Don't feed too much. You want to see beautiful frames of eggs and larvae in the middle. You want to see some pollen up above that, and you want to see some sugar syrup up above that. If you're starting to see sugar syrup all in between the brood down in the center, back off a little bit. You want to see that ring up above, and you want to see them drawing, but you don't want to plug them out. I don't know how many times I have 3 types of new customers. I have the ones that feed them like they should. And they go in there and they look before they just start feeding heavily. And then I have some that are like, okay, well, feeding a little bit's good than feeding lots of it is good. I've got this 2-gallon feeder I'm going to put on top of this hive, and I'm going to fill it all the way up. So I'll save myself some time. It'll help the bees. No, it's going to plug out the nest, especially if there's a honey flow going on. And typically when my nukes are being sold, it's in the middle of the honey flow. So I've seen people that'll plug them out and they'll cause a swarm to happen before they even finish drawing the 10th frame because they're just so plugged. And then there's some people that don't believe in feeding sugar syrup at all, and they're wondering why their bees aren't growing. So, it's a balancing act. Feeding is a balancing act, and it takes observation. But, that's the best I can give you. Sorry, that might have been a little bit, it might not have been descriptive enough. It might have been too much. Yeah, Ian makes close to 300 pounds per hive. Yeah, he lives up there where they make that canola honey. But 300 pounds of canola honey, 100 pounds of wildflower floral awesomeness. I'm going to go for less is more, Russell. But the dollars definitely say something different on that subject. Is there disadvantages to nukes over packages, if any? Nukes are way better if they're a quality nuke. Quality packages can be pretty good too, but it's hard to find a quality package. But there's so many problems with buying bees. There's so many problems with buying bees. Okay, let's break this down really quick. So packages have a lot of issues. First of all, many times the early packages, they bank the queens for a week or so before they even get into the package. So the longer queens are banked, the lower chance of them being accepted by the colony. Their pheromone production's down. They're raising early queens, so the chance for great mating aren't as good. They don't hardly let them lay. A lot of commercial guys, 14-day cycles. Queens don't even develop properly until after they've been laying for 21 days. So that's a problem there with the packages. So you're like, well, the nukes would be the obviously better choice. Not necessarily. One nice thing about a package is typically they're less money, but also they're cleaner typically because they're shaking bees in as opposed to bringing in combs. Sometimes you can have stuff in your combs, but you could buy a nucleus colony and have viruses, high mite loads. Also, this is what happens a lot too, is you'll have, and not just commercial guys, but even guys my size. And what we could do is I take my 300 colonies, and let's say I don't know how to raise my own queens. A lot of people don't want to raise queens. I don't know why. It's great. But maybe they don't have the time. I understand that. But so you take my 300 hives, and then we're going to make 300 nukes to sell. All right. Well, I don't know how to raise queens. I'm not going to take the time to raise queens. So what am I going to do? I'm going to buy those commercial queens and then drop them in there. So you're getting a nucleus colony with the same quality of queen. The queen sets the bar on the hive's potential. So queen quality is number one. So buying a nuke, you might get the same quality of queen, so, and, then there's people like, want to buy queens from, nukes from me. Mine aren't going to be ready till the 8th of May. But I can't get them ready before then. If they're going to be actual spring queens and they're going to be quality, I just can't do it unless I truck my bees down south somewhere and start them early. I just can't do it. That's just the way that it is. And, a lot of people don't want to wait that long. And I've been there. That's one of the reasons why I do these videos and why I'm so excited to see Bob Benny. And I like Ian so much because these guys, and what I try to do as well, and there's other guys on YouTube as well. Don't get me wrong. These are just kind of the ones I talk to more. They're trying to help you all get out of this rut that we all have been in at some point, is being dependent on these queens and these bees from these other places that really don't care. But if you can get a nuke with the quality queen or a package with the quality queen, the nuke is better. It is, but you're going to pay more for it. So I don't like buying either. I hate buying bees with a passion. Shane, my favorite breed of bee is Carney right now. I did Italians for years. I love Carneys much better. Some Carneys are not very Carney-like, though. But the kind we have are a very conservative bee. All right, Bee Lord. All right, my Polish friend. So I left 5 frames of honey for my bees to rob. 2 days and no action. Temperature 66 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, so Bee Lord, do you think there might be any nectar coming in at all? Because if there is any nectar coming in, they'll ignore it. Bees really don't like honey compared to nectar. Honestly, I think they would go for thin sugar syrup over honey in a frame like that. And it's interesting how as soon as that nectar comes in, you could just have 55-gallon drums of honey opened up, and bees will just turn up their nose to that honey. They don't like honey. To bees is like hardtack. It's just long-term preserved food. They really like that nectar. But yeah, I would imagine if the bees aren't robbing it out, if they're active and it's 66 degrees, that's plenty warm enough. There's got to be something they're preferring to go after instead. Even if it's just a trickle of nectar, they'll hit that. Seems a bit early for you all. But then again, I don't know Poland at all, so I don't know. But that's all I can say. You can extract that out and use it for something. You could even use it to make pollen patties, or you could use it to dilute down later and feed back. Just Maybe if you have a dearth period or something. I wouldn't feed it back for winter, though. Old honey is not really a good feed, and you know that. Especially you northern beekeepers know quite a bit. Yeah, I wouldn't think that you would have nectar this time of the year, Bee Lord. That's interesting. Do you suppose maybe it's getting so cold of a night that it doesn't, the honey itself is so cold that that's maybe a turnoff? That even if it's getting to 66, I don't know. I mean, that seems weird to me. If there's nothing coming in, my bees would just be mobbing that. Keep me posted on that, Bee Lord. And if something happens before too long, um, just like something clicks and the bees start going at it, see if you can figure out what it is and let me know. Sorry, I can't be more helpful. All right. I missed something. Hey, Kaylee, thank you so much. If you had a question above and I missed it, just go ahead and type it down below again. I'm bad about missing several of the questions as I'm trying to rack my brain. Um, Sometimes it doesn't compute very quickly. But thank you so much. It really does help quite a bit. Okay, so sugar honey you have. Okay. Yeah, keep me posted on that, B Lord. Hilltop Hive Company, are overwinter nukes superior to spring nukes? I would argue they are. As long as the queens aren't really old and let's say they're late summer queens, I would say that, yeah, they're better. I mean, obviously they're proven. They made it through a winter. They should be very well established. The queen's very established. And they can be sold earlier too. It's something that I've looked into doing, but it's a lot easier said than done. Um, Especially trying to overwinter a lot of small colonies. I'm not really proficient at that, but I would say overwinter nukes are superior to spring nukes. One, because if I keep them, I can make some honey off of those guys, or a bunch of other things. They grow quickly, especially this time of the year. Let's see here. What is your opinion about horizontal hives? Well, goodness, I just loaded my first one. Many of you commented that I didn't have the inner cover in it, and I did not. So that's something that I've got to do, is put the inner cover in that horizontal hive. I was in it today, just checking it out because I just can't help but check bees out, especially new equipment. I like it. The bees look great in there. I'm excited. I don't see why it's not going to work. Is it as convenient as a Langstroth hive? Am I going to switch over? No, no, I'm not going to. But I think if there was a hive that I had to go to outside of a Langstroth type hives, went vertically, I would totally go for this next, especially if I was just doing some hobby beekeeping. And I think that you can make these fairly easily. And, you're not having to bend over so much. And that's a gift right there, just having to pick up. But we'll see how it does. The colony is very large. I checked it today. There's a lot of brood in that colony. I'm anxious to see if we can get a good honey crop from it this year. And then I can maybe give a little bit more of an accurate opinion and assessment of what I feel. I might hate it by November, but I doubt it. Hi-Fi came in due to the mild winter here. That's what we had in Kentucky. I had a ton of frames of funny honey from over winter. I plan to spin it out and get clean drawn combs. Other ideas? Well, what I've been doing is, as I'm making up. Of course, this is just how I'm dealing with a lot of mine, because I do have some myself. Is I keep those set aside for my mating nukes, but you're needing those combs. The only thing that I know how to get those available is to either do what you're saying, is spin it out, and then you can use that to make pollen patties or whatever you want to, or you can open feed it. I don't know what Kentucky's laws are. Here in Tennessee, I don't think you're not supposed to do that here in Tennessee legally, but some states will allow you to do those kind of things. So, but then if you're open feeding it and your hives are taking it in, that kind of defeats the purpose, right? So unless you had a bee yard that wasn't for honey, I think the only way you're going to be able to deal with that is spinning it. Would you consider making a playlist of the time of your timing of doing things? I will try to eventually get around to that. I have no idea when that's going to happen. I do have playlists, but I have nothing kind of like what you're saying. I think that would be very beneficial. Um, honestly, we just make videos as we can kind of fit them in, and things become available. There's so many video ideas I would love to do. But yes, I would love to. Ian's done something similar where he's kind of had a compilation of some things throughout his season. I'm going to try to do that in the future, but I'm not sure that's happening this year. Right now, we're focused so much on this test yard. Well, I'm glad we're keeping you entertained at work. I don't know how to pronounce your apiary, but I'm glad that you're with us. So, as I did not know about the carniolan, what happens if you introduce a carny into an Italian hive, an assassination, or hybrids? Well, actually, over a period of a brood round or so, um, the hive will transition from Italian to carny. And typically, carnies and Italians will go from one to the other pretty easily as far as introducing queens. Um, I don't try to rush it. If I'm going from Italian to Carney or anything, I just don't try to rush it. Maybe put the queens in there if you're doing a requeen and leave the cork in on the cage or whatever it is. Don't let them get to the candy. Come back in 2 days later, then remove the cork and just give them a couple extra days to get used to that queen. And always put the cages in between a frame of larvae and emerging brood if possible. And that way you have a bunch of young bees emerging out that just absolutely love any queen they can get around. And then the emerging brood that gives, just puts good pheromones around that queen that really help just bees accept her. But yeah, carnies, they pretty much are pretty easy to switch over. Now, if Russians and different types of other bees, some can be a little bit tricky, but you won't end up with a hybrid. Not until she has a daughter, and then that daughter goes out on a mating flight, and then whatever she mates with, it's what you get. So I say my bees are carnies, but they open mate. So I have no clue what percentage of that they are. I select for the ones that have the carny traits, but I am sure there's Italian genetics in there. There's no such thing as a purebred bee, anyways. At what temperature do you do your first hive inspections? How do you decide if you feed syrup? Oh goodness, I've got some videos on that. I was into my hives in February, but the temperatures were 40s and 50s, and it really depends on what I'm doing. I'll drop patties in 30 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't recommend you do it unless you know why. You should do it, but feeding syrup needs to be warmer than that, probably pushing 60 degrees Fahrenheit. You can get by with it doing lower, though, if you're using something like a bucket or jar feeder where the cluster can warm that feeder up. But yeah, hi-fi, Kentucky has almost zero bee regulations. Well, Tennessee makes up for your lack thereof, buddy. We've got a lot of regulations here. Once I install a package into a new hive with a queen in a cage, how long should I wait to transport that hive to another yard? Look for eggs, or can I do it now before right away? Hey, Laura, I would think that I would like to let the queen lay first. I definitely wouldn't want to disrupt that period. If she's in the process before she lays and you're moving them around, you could cause a queen loss there. I think it's a very sensitive time. Whenever the queen's in a hive and she's not laying, it's a high risk situation. Hey, Steve Chubb. Yeah, I didn't really announce this one. I did it last minute. I wasn't even sure I was going to get around to doing it. I wanted to do it yesterday, and I passed out on the couch instead. Sorry, guys. But we got around to it this evening late. But hope you're doing well, Steve. Oh, I think I missed something again. I'm just trying to go through these comments. I'm new to Tennessee and new to beekeeping. Can you please tell me more about the beekeeping scene here in Tennessee? Well, you know, beekeeping in Tennessee is great. I mean, I love the state of Tennessee. It's not the best place in the world to keep bees. It's not the worst place in the world. I think that describes a lot of places for beekeepers, though. Um, we're very mild. If your bees die here in winter, it's because they weren't very strong, not because our winter was so brutal. Some people will argue that fact until they're blue in the face, but goodness gracious, if people can get bees to winter outside and wrapped up in Canada, we have no excuse for losing bees here in winter unless they are just poor. Poor colonies die here in winter. And, hey, I'm not saying I didn't lose a few colonies this winter. I did. But it's just that they were poor colonies. They weren't fit, and it should be able to survive. Our spring flows are short typically, but they can be very strong, and so you need to have a strong population ready to capitalize on that. Now there are some different areas in Tennessee. If you're more over in the mountains, then you're going to have different timings. There's also more sourwood over there towards the Smokies. Some people even will move their bees out of the valleys up into the mountains to extend their flow a little bit. And then there's also beekeeping down towards Memphis and the Delta areas along the Mississippi. And they plant cotton and a lot of different plants down there that help extend flows. And just because of the fertility, I know a guy, and his honey flow lasts almost a month longer than mine because of some of the crops they plant down there. So there's not a whole lot of professional beekeepers in Tennessee. There are some. They're more towards the mountains. They're more towards the Delta. There are some in the central. But Tennessee is not known for its successful beekeeping. And if you just look at a lot of our literature that has been regurgitated over a long period of time, it's no wonder why. We're fixing to change that. But I love this state. I think it's a great state for bees as far as what I'm trying to do. You can't be Ian Stepler here, 1,500 hives producing 300 pounds a colony. Can't do it. Oh, oh, sorry guys. I don't know how this thing kicks on me and like jumps down if I haven't scrolled in a while. I totally missed this from C Fuller 721 and Steve Chubb. Thank you guys so much for your donation. C Fuller, could you tell me if lots of drone brood is a bad thing? No queen cells and the queen is laying great. Also, can I freeze honey and feed it in the winter? You can freeze honey. Just keep in mind, honey does degrade as it gets older. Honey is very different for our digestive system, C. Fuller, and bees' digestive systems. So things that actually bother bees, we can eat. Doesn't bother our gut at all. Actually, we think it's pretty awesome. Old honey, though, can actually be poor food for wintering. Yeah, I honestly would think it'd be better to feed fresh sugar syrup in overwinter than feed old honey. I know that sounds weird, but there's a lot of research to back that up. If it's pure honey or if it's a mixture, you can extract that and you can dilute that and feed that this summer if there's a dearth, and then they'll burn through that. But I wouldn't want them to personally, I don't like overwintering bees on old honey, even if it's my own. And I don't want to overwinter the bees on old syrup. Fresh feed going into winter and fresh honey. I leave all of my fall honey for the bees. And that's pretty fresh. But lots of drone brood is not a problem either. Big, powerful colonies raise lots of drones. It's a natural tendency. If you have a lot of drone cells, they're going to raise more than maybe an average colony, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Drones are good. Varroa mites do reproduce more in drone comb. That would be the negative side of things. But if you have low Varroa levels in your colony, then you're just producing a lot of drones. And they do take a little bit of energy for the colony to feed and everything. But It's just part of the natural process. My best honey production colonies always have tons of drones. So it's just part of it. Steve Chubb, buddy, thank you so much again for coming on, and thanks for um, sponsoring a Hive last time you were on, and thanks for being generous again and donating that $20. Hit me with the question, man. Is checking my bees every 2 weeks too much? No, it's not. There are some people are like, if you, I've heard this, if you get into your bees too often, you'll cause them to leave. Says who? Says maybe you. I get into some colonies like daily, not like all the year around or something, but like when I'm doing queen rearing, like I'll have my queen rearing colonies that like I'm my starter. I graft into it, put the frame in there. 24 hours later, I pull that out, put it in a finisher. Then I throw another one in, and then I'll do it again, and then I'll do it again. I can be in that thing, maybe not 7 days back to back, but I'd say 5 days in a row. And then a few days later, I'll be back into it. Now, am I in there for 15 minutes at a time? No. But light inspections once every 2 weeks is great. Usually, when beekeepers have most of their issues happen, it's when they haven't been in for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. A lot can happen. Bees are dynamic. Think about this. Your queen can lay 1,500 eggs a day, but let's say she's just laying 1,000 and you don't come in for 30 days. What happens if something went wrong? Maybe you smashed her on the last inspection. You didn't even realize it. It doesn't happen that often, but let's say you do. Well, it's been 30 days since you've been in. What do you think's been happening? You've lost 30,000 bees in that 30 days because if she's been laying 1,000 eggs a day for a long time, then you're losing 1,000 bees a day. The problem is you haven't had a queen laying for 30 days. Maybe they're in the process of making a new one, but if they doesn't work out, then by the time you figure it out and you're like, oh my goodness, I've got to buy a queen, you're in the 11th hour. Every 2 weeks is a great time. Now, if the only time I would say do it more though, if you're in swarm season, you're trying to make that honey crop, they're building up, they're large, and they're wanting to swarm, I'd get in there once a week during that period. But I think every other week, by and large, for most of the year is a really good strategy. And you learn a lot doing that as well. Yeah, C. Fuller. Sorry it took so long to get around to it. This thing jumps around on me a lot. Steve Chubb, I was thinking of using Italian bee hives for splits and introducing another breed of queen as they build early. What do you think? I think as long as it's not too bizarre, it'll be fine. I really haven't had a big problem transitioning Italians to carnies. I think a lot of it has to do with the condition. If you're trying to introduce a queen into a big, strong double deep full of Italians, and it's a carny, then I say you'd have a chance for more issues. But if you're making splits and you're making little colonies accept queens better, and especially if your splits are made by and large with nurse bees. And if you have your big colony here, you make a split out of it, and you move the split over here. Well, that's nothing but young bees if it's in the same yard because all the old bees go back. I haven't had a problem switching from Italians to carnies. Now, I have had a little bit of an issue back when I tried Russians out. Russians have quite true Russians, like the USDA, the more as true as we can get here in the United States. They definitely, I think, take a little bit more of a slower introduction period. Some people might say differently on that, but I don't really have a problem going from Italian to carny. I go back and forth all the time. Mostly this stage just taking my Italians and going to carnies, though. Yeah, Russians are a little feisty for my taste. I really like my gentle bees, but like I said today, I got stung twice on the head, and I hadn't even been in any hives yet, and I got into 60 hives later. I didn't get a single sting. Weird how that works. Kamon, as Ian said before, the hive likes to blame the queen for everything. Well, I mean, yeah, they do. They do. Sometimes I like to blame the queens for everything, and sometimes it's good to blame them. But yes, especially older bees, they just don't take to it. And especially if you're trying to requeen, let's say in late June here, July and August, and there's just hardly any pollen coming in and there's no nectar coming in where I'm at, especially if you have dozens of colonies to a yard, there's a lot of stress, heat stress, other colonies trying to see if they can get in and rob. If they're all strong, you're good, but that it's not a good time for introducing queens into big colonies during that time. You do that same colony during the honey flow, and it's just like magic. Everything's better when everybody's fed. That's what I say. I'm happier when I'm being fed a good meal. Hey, Bud Helsing. I have very little experience with buckfast queens, and the ones that I had, I don't think were even worthy of being called legit buckfast. So I really don't know. I would love to try some pretty, and it's as good as buckfast as you could find these days, but don't really have any experience there. Let's see. Do you ever harvest honey from frames that have had brood in them? Oh yeah. I don't make it a very common practice, but it does. I do it from time to time. So, like, every now and then, I'll throw some like a medium on, or even a deep, and it'll be a brand new combs, and they'll draw, that out, and the queen maybe will lay a frame up out of that, or even just a little bit of some partial stuff. And sometimes they'll slip through an excluder. Maybe the excluder has a little bit of a weakness in it, a little too wide somewhere, and she'll get up in there and lay in it. I'm not too concerned. The only thing that I'm really concerned about, I don't want a bunch of old dark combs. So if it's been laid in once, it doesn't bother me. Maybe twice, but typically they only get laid in once if I'm going to use them. But the main thing, I don't want dark combs, and I definitely don't want any combs that have been treated with anything, natural or no. I really try to make sure that our honey supers are just as pure as possible. No treatments, and I try to keep the queens out of them if I can. But if they get around in there, it's not going to hurt anything. It's organic, man. I'm telling you, you want to talk nutrition? Probably the most nutritious thing in the hive is bee brood. If you ate that, that'd probably be really good for you. Dip it in chocolate. That might help a little bit. Let's see. How much honey does my operation make? Well, it depends on the year. Last year was really poor. Honey is not our number one profit either. Honestly, we do more in nucleus colonies and queens, and then honey would be third on that list. This year, I'm hoping to do somewhere around 24 to 30 barrels of honey, 55-gallon barrels. Last year, it was not anywhere close to that. Last year was pretty rough. I also have more hives this year, though. Now that I'm full time and not having to drive a semi and try to do a couple hundred hives, we've done a better job. I've been able to invest more of my time. But I would, this year, I would say on average, if last year was an average year, I probably would have made around 15, 16 barrels of honey. This year we have a lot more bees. We've expanded a little bit. The quality is the main thing. A lot of strong, big hives. So I'd like to see 25 to 30 barrels this year. If we can have an average year, we'll do it. What do you think the best states for beekeeping are? Well, Tennessee's not a terrible place, but if you're trying to really maximize things out, there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's no such thing as anything that's perfect. My buddy in Hawaii can produce hundreds of pounds a year. He can't sell it locally because everybody else can produce a ton of honey too. Small island. He has to ship it off the island. Gets like, I don't know how much he gets, but it is way under $2 a pound. So he does queen production though. So that's what he does, and they have issues over there as well. Besides that, cost of living's high. Tennessee, cost of living is not near as bad as some of these states. California, if you're wanting to do the pollination games, great. You want to talk about, Tennessee has a lot of beekeeping laws. California just has every other law underneath the sun. I mean, goodness. A gnat farts in California and they label it as cancer causing. So, a lot of guys do, like one of the guys that's speaking at our conference, he keeps bees in Kentucky during the season, Kentucky season, but then he trucks them down to Florida and overwinters them down there. And they get pollen down there, I think, in January. In Kentucky, he's not probably getting pollen until late February. They might get pollen down there, goodness, in late December. I mean, I don't know. He gets a big jump on the season, makes a small honey crop down there, or a decent one, depending on the year, trucks them up to Kentucky right in time for things to start up here. And he starts his nukes down there, though, and starts raising queens down there. So he gets a big jump. He can produce nukes way before I can. So migratory beekeeping can be pretty helpful. Some people are like, oh, that's bad for the bees, but is it? If you're trucking them into the place and they're getting sprayed like crazy, that's one thing. But the way this guy is doing it, he's really not. And he's taking them. Yes, the trip is stressful. I think that would be stressful, but you're moving them to lush pollens and nectar, and nothing makes a colony happy and healthy like that. You can feed all the sugar syrup and pollen patties in the world, won't beat nectar and pollen. So, some people like the Dakotas, obviously Canada, in some places, like if there's canola, but if you take canola away from Ian, is that a great place to keep bees? I don't know that it is. It might still be pretty good. It's definitely not what it is now. So there are special places around the country. I'm not an expert in those places, but nowhere is perfect. You can keep bees where you're at, I'm sure. You just have to. It might not be that great. I have no idea. You might be in the middle of a corn patch. Yeah, $18,000 to truck his hives to Cali. I believe that nuts and bolts beekeeping. A couple of my buddies that truck out to California. Well, of course, being a semi truck driver myself, I know how much it costs to haul stuff out, and yeah, it's expensive to get a semi to do anything. I think my Freightliner was getting 6.3 miles to the gallon, which pretty good. They have some of the new ones out with these engines though, and they were averaging closer to upper eights, which was really surprising. Yep, guys that here in Wisconsin who truck to Florida, they are good friends with Bob Benny. Yeah. I know several guys who go down Florida, Texas, places like that. They go up to Wisconsin, so they're just extending their flows. And some people think that's hard on the bees, but just that little transportation is. But man, what do you think's worse? And I've contemplated this a lot. I have a dearth from mid-June typically to late August. Do you think sitting there trying to rob each other and not having nutrition, as long as they have plenty of bee bread and reserves, they're pretty good. But if I was to take those bees up to a place where there's a strong flow, it's not just, oh, we're having to just tighten our belts and get by. No, we're going forwards. We're thriving. You can make even splits again and raise queens a lot easier. So it's all about nutrition and habitat and timing. And bees have been moved for pollination since, as far as I know, since the time of the Egyptians. They were moving them up and down the Nile on rafts. And there are some scientists who actually believe that they were using that during the period in the Bible where Joseph was producing those crops. And some of them feel like that might have been the way they were able to store so much food back in those days for the famine, is because someone, which could have been Joseph or somebody else, integrated pollination, which, as we know, pollination can affect seed production tenfold and even more in some crops with quality pollination. Pretty interesting to think about. You just never know. My mailing address. People can ask questions for the live chat. I don't get a lot for the, actual questions for the live chat via snail mail, but it is. Well, I'm going to leave it below. It is P.O. Box. Whoops. 322 games, bro. Okay, so here it is. That's my P.O. box down below. All that kind of stuff. P.O. Box 332, Gainsboro, Tennessee, 38562. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of different ways to keep bees. I told Laurel I do about a 2-hour live chat. We're 2.5 hours in. We've had a lot of great questions. I appreciate everybody contributing questions, and also the people who have donated as well. Really appreciate that. Kevin will be here in the next few days, and then we will be filming for the first videos of the test yard. I am super excited about that. It just seems like it's never going to get here, but I promise you it is really close. And we'll have some good videos on honey production, queen rearing, that horizontal hive, all kinds of stuff. We'll try to do as much as we can without killing ourselves. Yeah, the Suttons are pretty nice hi-fi. Good to see a lot of you guys. I hope you all are doing well and your season is doing great for you. We'll be talking soon. Try to do a live chat in another couple weeks. Thanks, everybody.